Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Banyen Books podcast. My name is Ross McKeechee. Today, our honored guest is Debbie Frank, joining us from London, England. Debbie is a world-renowned master astrologer with decades of experience in sharing, teaching, and providing life healing to her personal clients, which include celebrities, CEOs, and royalty. She continues to see clients who have been coming to her for over 20 years. Her most famous client was the late Princess Diana. Debbie became one of her inner circle in 1989, and they remained steadfast friends up until her death. Currently, Debbie is the weekly astrology columnist for Hello magazine and has also written columns for some of the UK's biggest publications, including the Daily Mail Online, Sunday Express, In Style, Sunday Mirror, and Daily Mirror. Debbie is the author of a number of books, including Written in the Stars. Today, she is in conversation with us about her newest book, What's Your Soul Sign? Astrology for Waking Up, Transforming, and Living a High Vibe Life. Anna Pasternak, writer and New York Times bestselling author, says this of Debbie Frank. Reading Debbie Frank is like going on an archaeological dig of your soul. She helps you excavate deeper parts of yourself to access greater self-realization, an essential tool if you have the courage to truly meet yourself. I really personally got a lot out of this book because Debbie gives the reader a link to where they can put in their information and receive a free birth chart. Then you can follow along through the chapters and focus on reading the information that is personal to your own chart. So it's interactive and it illuminates the path for accessing your own soul's gifts, learning, and transformation. If you'd like to learn more about our guest today and her work, you can visit her website, which is debbiefrank.com. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Debbie Frank. Thanks for being here, Debbie.
Oh, Ross, it's such a joy to be here, kind of vicariously in Vancouver, which is definitely one of my favorite cities in the world. I haven't been there for many, many years, but it really struck me as just so beautiful, had such a special energy to it. So it's a delight to be connected, if only on frequency at this point.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So you've been doing this for a long time now, almost 40 years. You've been an astrologer.
Really? Oh, no. What a shock it is to hear that.
Not that anyone would guess it by looking at it. You're radiant. In chapter 1 of the book, you tell us that astrology itself is a field of resonance. It's both incredibly simple and incredibly complex. I'm wondering if you can tell us from where you are now, how do you approach astrology as both what you say it's a science and a sacred art?
I think this is what has always continued to fascinate me about astrology, and it just provides never-ending intrigue as far as I'm concerned. By its very nature, it encapsulates this duality of being a science and an art, and of being very simple and very complex. And that's what I love about it, is that you can approach it, or you can have an entry point which is quite simple. For instance, you could find that your entry point into astrology are daily horoscopes, say. And those are, by definition, quite simple. They're a bit like thought for the day, just for your sun sign. And then if you start to really get into it with a passion, like that's what happened to me, and I hope anyone reading my book will feel that that ignites in them, that actually there are all these layers, there are all these nuances. So we can't stay just on the surface, because we want to dip in to see all the different contradictions that make us up. And I think, you know, this is part of human nature, isn't it? That we're never just one thing. We are all contradictory. And I think in a way, you know, with my own clients, they feel that sense of relief that their birth chart is a mirror of everything, including their dualities, their contradictions. And so they feel seen on every level. So it's far from simple. As for being a science and a sacred art, well, I think maybe back in the day, in Renaissance times, we would not have found that challenging, because doctors were schooled in astrology, for instance. So it wasn't differentiated in that way. It was thought by the Renaissance people to be a very academic subject. And of course, it really is a very learned academic subject if you delve into it very deeply. Unfortunately, of course, during the scientific age, it got kind of discredited or dismissed by the prevailing scientific mindset, which is predicated on the fact that if something can't be proven, then it has no value, or it can't exist, which actually is quite a tyrannical way of viewing the sacred arts, or anything that has emotional appeal. I mean, when I'm confronted with cynics, say, I say to them, I ask them a simple question, actually: do you believe in love? And of course, they always say yes. And I said, well, how can you believe in it? Because you can't prove it. Okay, so that's the thing. We can't just cut out things that can't be proven. But what is delighting me at the moment is that science is moving on a pace to the quantum area, where it is on frequencies. And that's very similar to how astrology works. It's vibration and frequencies. So I think what we're really doing more is moving towards joined up thinking, where the science and the sacred art will start to become friends again. This is my hope.
That's awesome. That's great. And, you know, it does strike me as very quite obviously scientific. Maybe you can tell us about the time of birth and why that's important, because there is actually observable realities going on with the planets when we're born.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the calculation of the chart is in itself very precise and very scientific. And here in the UK, where I live, of course, they don't write your birth time on your birth certificate unless you are a twin. And that's simply so there's no dispute over inheritance, nothing to do with astrology. But elsewhere, some places in Europe and in the US, I don't know, maybe in Canada, they do write it on the birth chart. And therefore, everyone is able to access that knowledge. Otherwise, here in this country, we're relying on the memories of the mother, perhaps, you know, many decades previously. But the moment of birth, when we take our first breath, when we incarnate as souls into this earthly plane, is a very sacred moment. And the birth chart itself is like a map of the heavens. In fact, I'll hold one up so that everyone can see what a birth chart looks like. I don't know if you can see that. So the moment of birth is here. This is the ascendant, the rising sign. And that sets the framework for the entire chart, because it's like a frozen moment in time, where we're taking an absolute look here at where the planets were at the exact moment that you were born. And then, of course, the planets themselves don't stop. They carry on. I mean, the moon is the fastest moving celestial body, takes 29 days to go round every single sign of the zodiac. And the slowest is Pluto. It takes 248 years. So they all, that's what I love about them in their stately motions. You know, they're all moving at these different speeds and everything, but your own birth chart is yours forever, forevermore. And we're looking at what happens when the planets continue in their cycles and then start to pulse at this chart of yours. And that's often a trigger point for awareness, for realizations, and sometimes, you know, obviously for events in our lives as well. So I think that that kind of groundedness of the birth chart, which is literally, you know, on the birth chart itself, you know, there we have the calculation for the exact moment that you were born. And it sets the angles of the chart. These are all to do with the rhythms of the day and night, and there they are, encapsulated in our birth chart. It's really very special.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the angles? That was something I didn't have any understanding of until I looked at your book.
Yes, well, the angles are brought into being by the moment of your birth. So basically, the sign that is rising is literally which sign is rising according to where you were born and the moment that you're born, on the horizon. So it's like, you know, that's your sunrise, or that's your rise. And on the opposite point of that is the relationship angle. So the ascendant is where you're meeting the world. It's what's rising. It's your moment of birth, and it's kind of imprinted on you. That's how you meet the world. So let's just take an example. If you have Aries rising, say, well, Aries is a very forceful sign. It's, you know, a sign that wants to make a big impression. It's in a hurry. So, you know, often that says something about the actual birth. Maybe the birth was very quick. It all sort of happened very speedily, and that person will continue to meet situations in life in this very strong way, where they walk into a room and they make things happen, and they're the big mover and shaker. And on the other end of that is always going to be the opposite sign. Well, the opposite sign to Aries is Libra. So Libra is the accommodating, compromising, people-pleasing. So you'd find somebody with Aries rising would tend to attract magnetically someone who is more of a Libra type. They may not be a Libra, but someone who neutralizes that very fiery Aries energy by being a bit more socially skilled, shall we say, a bit more accommodating. So those two angles are about what you're putting out and what you're receiving. And then on the vertical angles, which are the midheaven is up here, and this is called the IC, the Imam Kohli. This one is about your purpose in life. It's about what you're here to do and how you go about that. And this is the most private part of the chart. This is your home. It's who you are at home. It says a lot about your family. So the angles themselves, if you just only know the angles, can tell you so much about who you are, both internally and out in the world.
Yes, yes. And what about the nodes? This was another interesting. I mean, everybody tends to know their sun sign and maybe their rising sign, but I didn't know about the nodes, the north and south nodes.
Yeah, the nodes are often overlooked, but because I wanted to focus on a soul level, I felt I wanted to bring the nodes center stage, really, because I just see it so much in my work, that there's always this node connection between people. So, you know, my clients and their relationships, their children, you know, there's always this nodal connection, which is a kind of fate and destiny connection, if you like. So the north node is what you're here to learn in this life. And the south node is what you're bringing in with you. So it might say something about a past life. So what we find is that in your connections with people, when you have that really deep sense of familiarity with someone, and I think we've all felt that at some points with people, you sort of feel as if you know that person, even though you've just met them. It's nearly always about the node. There's a nodal connection. And maybe they're going to be a mentor, maybe they are teaching you how to move into your own north node and learn these lessons that you're here to get in this lifetime. Or maybe that sense of familiarity is because it's around the south node and you just get that sense, I'm so comfortable with that person. you know, automatic. I'm so open to that person because your South Node is conjunct their Venus or whatever. So it's very interesting.
Right. Now, maybe we can just give an overview of the three categories of planets and then kind of go into more specifics about each of them. So we have the personal, the social, and the outer planets. Can you give us kind of just a general overview of those three?
Yes, well, the personal planets really are the sun, the moon. The sun and the moon are called the luminaries, very luminous in our skies. So the sun is the core essence of who you are. And the moon is your inner life, and it's like your comfort zone, if you like. It can say also quite a lot specifically about the kind of mothering you had, and also what kind of nurturing you give to other people. It's sort of like, how do you feel at home? And it's very interesting. You can sort of imagine that, oh, well, everyone feels home to be, you know, it's a sort of generic term, but it's very particular. So somebody with the moon in Aquarius actually likes their home to be filled with people. They don't really want to be at home too much. They really feel at home out there in the world. Whereas someone who has the moon in Cancer is really got that strong nesting instinct. You know, they want to stay in, they want to be rooted. So that's just a little example. And then Mercury is the planet of the mind. This is the mythology of Hermes, the messenger of the gods. So this is how you think and how you communicate. And I mean, if only people would recognize this in the education system, we wouldn't have problems with trying to inform and teach people who learn through very different modalities, because you might have Mercury in Pisces and be very sponge-like, but rather unfocused or seem to be a bit dreamy. Or you might have Mercury in Taurus, which really wants to understand things slowly and in a practical, methodical way. So how we communicate and how we engage with information is very much about where our Mercury is. And we move on to Venus, that planet of love and relationship. So with Venus, it's about our value system, and we tend to love what we value. So what we like about a person, what we're drawn to in someone, is because we hold those qualities, those values very dear. But it's also our aesthetics. I mean, Venus, Aphrodite, she's the beautiful goddess, and it's very much about what appeals to us, even visually. And it can be like, if you want to know the perfect gift for someone, take a look at their Venus, because it will tell you what they really find beautiful. So, and how do we love? We love in very different ways. What are we looking for? I mean, Venus in Gemini is a people person. So they want to have a, you know, communication, stimulation, a meeting of minds. They don't want to have all the time just two people. They want to be out with friends and be as a couple. Whereas, say, someone with Venus in Leo, well, they need a massive amount of attention and pizzazz, you know, all the best things in life, the qualities, or the quality of life, very important to them. Venus in Sagittarius wants to have a really good time. They're fun, they're adventurous. You know, Venus in Virgo is very picky and a bit critical, but very much the fixer, will sort everything out for you. So, I mean, that's very interesting, understanding, we're all talking about, you know, the love languages we have, because it's what is love? What makes you feel loved? I mean, we might be giving people love in a way that they can't receive it, because if our Venuses are incompatible, we don't understand that that person making us a cup of tea was the same thing as them saying they love us, right? So if we know the Venus, we know the kinds of things that are in their language. And then we have Mars. Yeah, we have Mars. Mars, the god of war. So he's a bit of a thug. He's you know, he's like how we do things, and we all need to get in touch with our Mars. Mars shows how we go about getting things done, so whatever sign it's in. If Mars is in Capricorn, then we're very professional. You know, we want to do things properly. If Mars is in Scorpio, then we don't really want to do anything unless we're very passionate about it. It's very well, I don't know if you have Marmite in your country, maybe Vegemite, I don't know, but we have this saying over here here. It's very Marmite, because people love or hate Marmite. And that's the same as having Mars in Scorpio, because they either love or hate, they're interested or they're not interested. So yes, it's recognizing what our strengths are there. So these are all the personal planets. And these are the things that are very important and highly visible in our relationships with other people. It's not just the sun sign. The sun sign is important, but I mean, if our moon signs are incompatible, and that's what we're like at home, then, you know, how are we going to live with someone if our moon signs are incompatible? It's very lovely. We feel that real harmony when we've got compatible moon signs and compatible Venus, and obviously meeting of minds with the Mercury. And the Mars is great as well. If we're doing a project, a team with, you know, similar Mars in a similar sign, brilliant. So those things are how we kind of go about our everyday lives, if you like. And they then, well, we can move then to the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn, who move much more slowly. Jupiter takes 11 to 12 years to go right around the zodiac, and Saturn takes 29 years to go right around. So we're starting to get these slower moving planets, and therefore they tend to be, we're looking more at generations. So people, for instance, in your year group at school, well, they're probably going to have Jupiter pretty much in the same sign as you. And it's, I think then we're starting to move into these waves. I call them waves, that, you know, we're part of something. So Jupiter is a social planet because it's our outlook on the world in a way. And it's very much to do with whether we feel the world to be a benign place, a benevolent place, an abundant place. Jupiter is, you know, Zeus, the sky god, where everything is available. If we have what I call a strong Jupiter, Jupiter is placed and he's touching one of the personal planets, or he's on an angle, then we're a Jupiter person. We're larger than life, we're traveling, we're global, you know, we're all about fun, we make people laugh, we're a big personality. And then we have Saturn, Kronos. Saturn is a planet of karma, and he can be actually where our core wound lies, where we feel, you know, a little bit insecure, but we cover it up. So it's where we might be a bit defended, and it's where many of our life lessons are. But again, it's generational. Saturn spends around 2.5 years in each sign. So we're born in this wave where, you know, this is the work that our wave has to do. And then we move on to the outer planets, which were discovered a lot later, because, you know, the first one we meet is Uranus, and that was only discovered at the time of the French Revolution. And it's very interesting that Uranus itself is known as the planet of revolution, and there it was, discovered at the time of the French Revolution. And Uranus, there he is all about, you know, how we make a difference, what, you know, to what extent we want to stand outside of the mainstream. You know, are we okay with making waves, or to what extent do we want to conform? It's very different. Saturn, we want to conform, we want to do the right thing. Uranus, we want to be the rebel, we want to be free, we want to be liberated. And when we have a strong Uranus in our chart, then our life path is going to be about doing it our way. So again, when I'm working with clients, say they're Venus and Uranus together, it's saying that their love lives are going to be very unusual, that their timing in life is going to be inside out. They're not going to be following their peer group necessarily. They're going to be attracted to people who are unusual. I mean, not the kind of person perhaps they ought, in inverted commas, to be with. You know, so Uranus is doing your own thing and wanting to be yourself within a relationship, to want to not compromise on that level. And then we have Neptune, which is the planet of dreams and creativity. And Neptune is about spirituality and sensitivity, and it's a great long time that Neptune spends. He spends 14 years in a sign, so it's a massive generational thing. And at the moment, Neptune is in his home sign of Pisces. And I think that Neptune is the planet where we see our sensitivity, and we see where we are open to the unseen, and what our relationship is like with the unseen, and whether we're able to make connections. Because it's definitely, you know, for sure that people who are more intrigued by astrology are those people who find it easier to work with symbols and connections and to find connections. Whereas, you know, there are some people who, even if you point out a connection, they don't really get it. They don't see that things can be connected. They don't see what's behind that. So if you've got that kind of energy about you and you're a Neptunian, say, or you've got strong Pisces in your chart, then all of this is, you know, you take to it like a duck to water to keep with the watery symbology of Neptune and Pisces. It's definitely somebody who's attuned to those subtle realms and energy bodies. And then last but not least, because he's the planet of power, is Pluto, which is the slowest one, as I mentioned before, 248 years. And Pluto is currently in Capricorn, doing a huge demolition job through Capricorn, which is the structure of society, as we've seen. So there he is. You know, Pluto is intense. He's very much associated with, you know, things that have been hidden, that come up maybe from the underworld. He's the shadow side of human nature, where things get exposed. And he's about passion and power, basically. So we can't just hide away from Pluto. You know, we have to make friends with Pluto. We have to step into our power. And that's really what this book is all about, you know, sort of seeing all of these energies. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, tarot cards, where there are some difficult cards. Obviously in a deck there's a death card, or that, you know, there are cards that we're like, ooh. And then there's, you know, some planets in astrology like Saturn and Pluto, sort of sharp intake of breath, but actually nothing to be frightened of, because we all have these planets, and these planets are all part of our energetic frequency in daily life. And we have to be able to step into our power and to embrace the not so nice and the nice, and to evolve through all of this. And you know, I think, you know, one of the most frequently asked questions I have in my readings are, you know, is it good or is it bad? And I always say, you know, that's such an interesting question, because in all my years I've come to understand that really there's no such thing as good and bad. You know, they come together. And often, you know, we prejudge and we think something is going to be absolutely lovely, and it turns out to be so stressful, and, you know, it's got a price to pay. And the things that were the most challenging, that's where we learn. And it turns out actually that in hindsight, it's the best thing that ever happened, because it taught us such a lot. So, you know, it's interesting with the outer planets. They are connected with more of a challenge, but it's a challenge to evolve and grow. So we're either going to stay stuck and stagnant and not learn very much, which is fine, that's everyone's choice. But it's actually great to just dive into these energies and go, okay, universe, give me what you've got, and I'm going to go with it and come out the other side, right? Yeah. So there's a quick whisk through the planetary system.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. So that was a big overview. Maybe I'll just quickly recap for everybody. So we just went through the three groups of planets: the personal planets, the social planets, and the outer planets. And Debbie gave us a nice overview of each one of those planets. I'd like to ask you about Mercury, one of the personal planets, because I think we're just coming to the end of a Mercury retrograde. Is that true?
We are indeed. Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's right. Goes direct on Monday. Yeah, so I've written a lot about Mercury retrograde, and I've just literally listed some of the crazy things that happen when Mercury is retrograde. In fact, we're very brave doing this on a Mercury retrograde, because often the technology gets affected. And it happened to me with a client yesterday. You know, the volume didn't work, and then nothing worked. So that can happen. That's a bit like a trickster energy with the Mercury retrograde. It can have like a trickster where nothing is as smooth as we would hope when Mercury is direct and we expect on a journey to go from A to B. But, you know, it often is a time when, you know, public transport doesn't work as it should, appointments and everything get rescheduled. That's on a very sort of basic level. But Mercury is currently retrograde in Libra. And Libra, of course, is the sign of justice and very much associated with relationships. And many, many people have been telling me during this retrograde cycle over the last 3.5 weeks that either they haven't really had much energy to do very much. It makes people go much more internal, or that things from the past come up. So it's quite interesting sometimes, you know, this can be a relationship from the past, or that you start to think, it brings up things from the unconscious, and we start to revisit what our pattern might be in relationships. So it can be an amazing time to do some inner work when Mercury is retrograde. And we start to see what's going on with ourselves, actually. We can get that epiphany, and it's sort of like it slows down the noise in the outside world so that we can have a bit of a rethink. But I think it's very useful, and often it's helpful as well to not be in a rush with our projects. Because if Mercury is retrograde, we sometimes need to revise, or things that have gone on the back burner and you might have forgotten all about them. Suddenly you get an email, someone's interested in that again, and it comes back to life. So it's sort of almost as if it changes our framing of time, past, present, and future. It's a very interesting cycle.
Very interesting. The other thing that you mentioned is that Mercury is the planet of mental health. It's the planet of the mind. And I wanted to ask you about, you do talk about the environment that we're in today with constant 24/7 communication and connection to media. So how do we work with Mercury in our lives to create meaningful connections and to not be overwhelmed by the constant communication?
Yes, well, I do think it really is vital to try and unplug. And to choose your media. You know, we tend to sort of become creatures of habit, and we're always listening to something, and really ask yourself, is what I'm hearing valuable to me? Do I really need to listen to all of this? Because this is where we get overwhelmed. And I think it's about stillness, trying to find some stillness, trying to find some silence. I think a great antidote is literally trying to walk in nature, and a little bit of meditation, a little walking meditation. And personally, I find that very, very helpful to switch off and to commune with the energies, the universal energies, rather than the media energies, to actually just still the mind and to get that perspective of universality. I think that's very important. So I think if we're always on with media and this frenetic rushing around, we can tend to just get lost in it, and it's incredibly debilitating for our energies. And we really do have such sensitive systems and subtle bodies. We get overwhelmed, and we get what I call fragmented, where we can't find the wholeness in ourselves. We get all split off from ourselves, and we lose our balance.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you. Now, Venus. Planet of love. And this I found very interesting. I loved what you had to say about how Venus will magnetize what's in your frequency, whether we say we want it or not. Can you speak about Venus in the shadow and how we can avoid unconsciously attracting toxic relationships?
Yes. Well, it is very interesting, obviously, because nobody in their right minds would consciously attract toxic relationships. So it's always in the unconscious. And there's always a hook that goes into perhaps a childhood pattern where it's tied up with our own sense of how we got through our childhood, and we became someone perhaps who fixed other people or helped other people, and then in turn we continue to, although we're not looking for it in inverted commas, we continue to attract people who need our help. So for instance, we might have, you know, a big helper signature is Venus in Pisces or Venus in Virgo, who really, both of those give a lot to other people, and maybe both of them can overgive. Now, it's not as if they're walking around kind of going, sign up here, please, where's the nearest vampire so that I can be totally drained by overgiving, and nobody would do that. But something about their energy is inviting that dynamic. I think it's really not about starting with the relationship, but starting with yourself and becoming aware of what is your relationship dynamic? Sort of taking a look at your own emotional history or patterns. You know, what's the theme that runs through your relationships? You don't even have to be an astrologer to look at that. And then have a look at that with your Venus in your chart, and where it is, and whether there are other planets near to it, and what kind of signatures you have. So therefore, say you've got a Venus Pluto or a Venus in Scorpio, which is going to be this very intense energy, so that you know that, you know, that boy next door or that girl next door isn't going to really do it for you. You want to go for that, you know, mysterious person who maybe gives off a bit of a vibe that would scare other people, but for you, you think, oh, I can handle that. That's really intriguing, because you've got a Pluto in your chart that's strong, or the Scorpio. And it's about knowing yourself really, and kind of thinking consciously, do I really want another project? Do I really want to get involved with this power dynamic? Because that's really what the Scorpio and Pluto is about. It's about the power. And I think after a few times of always giving your power away in relationships, you get to a place where you recognize that it's not very healthy. And that, you know, that sometimes, you know, especially people with personality disorders, you know, they see you coming, and so they will try and be so charming to seduce you. It looks so seductive. You think, oh, this person's just absolutely wonderful, and of course underneath is the vampire, or the person, you know, with a personality disorder, the narcissist or whatever. So it's about recognizing and being a bit savvy. I mean, to really not think that, you know, relationships just happen to you. They don't. You invite them in, you invite certain patterns in, and there's a reason why. It's in your magnetic energy. And even if you do have Venus in Scorpio, what about going for a powerful love instead of a power struggle between two people? It's like, oh, let's reframe this. You know, that's when it gets really exciting. We can start to co-create with the universe and reframe these energies to make the love just incredibly powerful itself, the love itself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What about Mars? I've got a quote from the book that says, "We need Mars energy as we can't access our willpower without it. It gives us the gift of manifestation, yet we need to ask what it is we really want from a deeper place than the small self, from a place of soul purpose." How do we tap into that?
Yes. Well, you know, there's definitely, when we start to sort of unpick ourselves in our charts, you know, there's the ego, and then there's the soul. And, you know, the ego might want very different things from the soul. So, you know, often the ego is making a big fuss, you know, it can't get what it wants. It's throwing its toys out of the pram. And the soul is really thinking, hooray, this person is going to learn so much from not getting what they want. This is absolutely, we're on soul purpose. We're here, you know. So say if you've got Mars in Pisces and you find it hard to assert yourself, say, because Mars in Pisces often has a bit of a tall poppy syndrome. In other words, they don't want to stand out from the crowds. They don't want to be too visible. They want to fit in. They're sort of like the chameleons. You know, I think, you know, there's a way of being with the Mars in Pisces, which is very soulful. It's about knowing that what you want has to be aligned with something that speaks to your soul, because it's just never going to work. So in other words, doing what everyone else wants you to do is never going to satisfy you, and you'll just end up disappearing in a way. So yeah, I think this interplay between the ego and the soul is fascinating. I mean, I have a client, I always tell this story. Obviously, I'm not going to say their name, so it doesn't matter, but they always saying to me, you know, I really, you know, just want to be peaceful, and I want to be happy. And then in the next breath, they're saying, so Debbie, tell me, when am I going to get my private jet? And I just laugh and I say, you know, your soul doesn't care whether you have a private jet or not. it's sort of funny. And then that person, she laughs as well, because she knows that's just her ego talking, that really what she wants from the soul perspective is the peace. And that even if she had the private jet, so then she still wouldn't be peaceful because it wouldn't be big enough or whatever, you know. So the ego can hardly ever be satisfied. As soon as we satisfy the ego, it wants more. That's its whole raison d'etre. But, you know, it's very interesting to look at where your Mars is placed, because it tells you a lot about the ego. And of course, it's not to demonize the ego. We need the ego. The ego really helps us manifest and do things. And if you're not in touch with your Mars, and you're not able to do anything, we can get very depressed. That's the flip side, you know, anger and depression. If we're not using the Mars to be in touch with our willpower, we can feel very down about that, very depressed. So it's good to use the ego. It's good to flex that muscle, but to recognize that underneath it, it's the deeper purpose. Just check in with your deeper purpose.
Thank you. Moving on to the social planets, Jupiter and Saturn, how do they interact with our personal planets?
Well, it depends where they're placed in your chart. They might be on an angle, say, it might be that you have Jupiter on the relationship angle of your chart, and therefore you're going to attract to you a Jupiter type of person who brings Jupiter into your life. So it will be, again, this very sort of larger than life person, a person who has a lot of confidence, who wants to live a big life, and they might actually be Sagittarian. But, you know, if Jupiter is with any of your planets by aspect, and if you have your chart, you'll see on the aspect grid, which is this down here, and the ones from my book, they're actually listed, which makes it, I deliberately made it because that's advanced to having to understand what that means. In the ones you receive from my book, it actually lists the aspects that you have. And, you know, if you have any aspect between your personal planets and Jupiter, then you can access that Jupiter energy. This is, you know, the abundance. It's about looking on the bright side, looking more philosophically. So, you know, it's looking to see where the opportunities are. If, you know, you have the Sun and Jupiter, then you know that really you're born to help other people. You're kind of there to help other people, to show the way for them in a way, be a way shower, because Jupiter has this kind of natural philosophy about life and can sort of be a healer in a way, because you're saying to people, look, you know, look beyond what's going on for you. Look at the bigger picture. That's always Jupiter. Or look at the opportunity that's in here. So it's not just in your own life, but it's also for other people as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And then we have the outer planets, and you talk about these generational waves. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I mean, you touched on it before, but can we go a little more depth? I was very curious about these generational waves.
Yes, well, they are very interesting. I mean, one wave, which let's just look at some recent waves for some recent babies born. Okay, so the COVID wave, that COVID signature, which as an astrologer, I was looking at years before, thinking, oh my goodness, you know, what on earth is going to happen here in January 2020, because there was a lineup of Saturn and Pluto together in Capricorn. Okay, so that wave is super intense, and that's a whole generation as well that's born. COVID may disappear eventually, but that generation who've come in with that COVID signature are going to be the ones that change the world in a way. So it's kind of like the collective frequency. And, you know, you sort of see with these slower moving planets, you know, there are the war babies, the ones born in, say, the Second World War, you know, and they are very much people that have a tremendous grounding in, you know, how to be practical and get by when the going is tough, you know. And then there's, you know, other generations like millennials are very interesting. You know, they're born often, I mean, that's quite a big span of time, but a lot of them have Uranus conjunct Neptune, which is a frequency which is incredibly creative. It's very sort of otherworldly. And you can see this with millennials that, you know, the old setup and systems, they just don't mean anything to millennials, because they're attuned actually to more of this astrological vibration in a way. You know, they get that universal energy, and you know, that's really special. So they literally have an entirely different value system, and they are very connected to each other. That millennial way of thinking is, you know, a whole zeitgeist of its own, isn't it?
Right. So there really are these big differences between the generations.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, there's so many things I'd like to ask you, but I want to get on to some of our audience questions, because there's some really good ones here. The first one is from Mary, and she asks, does astrology indicate or determine if a person takes a path of evil or great good? For example, would Hitler's chart indicate what he would do in his life, or what is the role of free will in such things?
That's a very interesting question, Mary. Well, I don't have Hitler's chart to hand. I think he was a Taurian, as far as I know. And even Hitler was also a painter, like Winston Churchill. I mean, you know, there was a kind of sensitivity somewhere in that nature. It's hard to believe, but yes. And there is always free will, because there is no such thing as a totally evil chart. There is a destiny that a character a person can get caught up in, where they only access the dark, the shadow side, and we can only presume that's what happened there with Hitler. But I think as a general thing, we have to, all of us, own our shadow, and we all have parts of ourselves that are vulnerable, and that maybe are, you know, I mean, you know, that we're envious of other people, or we're so highly competitive that we'd ride roughshod over other people, whatever it is, you know. And it's sort of actually owning that part of ourselves and accepting it. It's not, it's sort of owning it, integrating it, and making ourselves whole, that we have these aspects to our nature, but that we are a soul that can choose how we express and evolve and move up to a kind of elevation of the most noble qualities that we have in our charts. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Another question we have is from Bryn. Bryn asks, regarding generational waves, is it odd for a person to never relate to their own generation, but rather find partners and friends generally from the next generation younger than them instead? For example, for years in my 30s and 40s, I always dated men 10 or 15 years younger, and my closest friends were in that age range. Not much connection to people my age.
Well, the generational planets are by definition a sort of generalization. It's not just a generation, you know, so not everyone is going to fit into their generation. It is a collective wave, but in that all these particles of people and individual souls that have their individual charts. So I would think that if we looked at your chart individually and specifically, that we would see perhaps it connects with another generation, or that perhaps you have a very strong Uranus, in which case you're not going to want to fit into your generation, because that's about standing outside and making your own choices and doing your own thing. So I would think that's quite possible for your chart.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is from Christina. Christina asks, what do you feel are the most difficult aspects to overcome in a chart? For example, Saturn opposed Mars in certain houses. Are there any placements that you feel are very challenging to creating a stable and healthy daily life?
I think when we look at the chart, I mean, it never ceases to amaze me, the wonderful human spirit that we have. Sometimes, obviously, I'm looking at a chart before I meet with a client, and I might be thinking, gosh, you know, this has got quite a lot of challenges in it, this chart. And yet I'm absolutely amazed at the power of the spirit, where they have created stability and they have overcome very difficult circumstances. I don't think there's any one particular signature. I would say that because of the emphasis in our Western world in particular of everything being very out there and extrovert, I would say that when I see a lot of planets in the 12th house, and here's an example of many planets in the 12th house, then the 12th house is spiritual and it's mystical and it's inner, and it's one of those areas which it's hard to access. So it can be very difficult for that person to feel that they belong in the world, or that they can even understand themselves, because there can be a tremendous amount of unconscious energy going on there. So I think that's one of the hardest houses to unpick, no matter whether you have one planet there or several. But the riches that are contained in there are absolutely enormous. I mean, obviously the 8th house, which is the Scorpio house of intimacy, shared resources. It's also in medieval astrology known as the house of death. I mean, not that we predict death, but you know, it's a place where we go deep, deep, deep. That's another area that people wouldn't particularly, you know, it's not exactly light and frothy material, is it? But what you find with that is that a lot of people, you know, they might be in the financial world, you know, they're dealing with shared resources that way. Or they might be psychotherapists and dealing with a lot of people's energies that are underneath, and doing all of that kind of Scorpio work. As I said, really, it's not to be, is it good or bad, but to actually find what is the highest that we can find within this place.
Thank you. There's a question from Shelley, who says, can you talk about the quintile and biquintile? I have Sun, Leo, 4th quintile, ascending Tau, and Mars Cap, 8th, Jupiter Pisces. That's a lot of information, but...
Yeah, well, quintiles are, you know, very much what I would call the special aspects. I mean, they often denote very special talents. I think for the purposes of my book, I did not go into any of what I would call the minor aspects, because they're quite rarefied in a way and quite advanced. And so in my book, I wanted people, because we're talking about the soul in quite an advanced way, I didn't want to go into the technicalities that could be overwhelming. But you've got a lot of special energy there. Let's just say that. A lot of special talents that you could tap into.
Wonderful. Thank you. Here's about the soul. There's a question from Leah, who says, is the soul not in the baby at its conception? Please clarify this concept. Thank you.
Yes, well, there is such a thing as a conception chart that you can do, and the prenatal eclipse. I mean, of course, the soul is beyond our birth. I mean, it's infinite. It goes beyond, you know, all our specific lifetimes. We're talking about the moment at which the soul truly incarnates, and the intention of the soul is there for our chart, obviously, because, and it's my belief that it is our soul that chooses our chart. So we're very much involved with designing what are our life lessons going to be, and therefore we would choose not only our chart, but some of our big relationships with family and loved ones, and certain life challenges and things that we are here to learn. So the soul is omnipresent. It's just about the entry. I mean, the soul can be super close, kind of, but at the entry point, coming into our body. I mean, in our first breath, we really incarnate. You know, that's when we are here in the world by ourselves. We're not inside the mother's womb anymore. And therefore, this is the start of our earthly life. And that's really the start of our true spark of life, and our soul to be connected with.
Thank you. There's a question from Carla. You had mentioned at the start that some people might not know the hour of their birth. So she asks, what if one doesn't know the hour of one's birth?
Yes, well, I have to say, I've got a lot of experience of that. Sometimes it's just given within, like, say, somebody, the mother will say, well, it was in the afternoon, and then I'll ask questions maybe via the client. What does your mother mean by the afternoon? You know, if it's tea time, what kind of time is that normally for her? You know, or it's an interesting one, trying to sort of refine it. There are people who specialize in what's called rectification, which is a very complex thing where you would write down all important events that have happened in your life, the dates, and somebody can have a look to see how that connects with your chart at various times of day and start to narrow it down. There are some experts in that. I wouldn't claim to be an expert in that, but I have definitely helped within a time frame. I mean, there are various ways. Some people tell me that they've dowsed for their time of birth. Some people tell me kinesiology has told them their time of birth. You know, even my own daughter, who's adopted, this is the ultimate irony, I do not know her time of birth. So, you know, we work, but I mean, not knowing the exact time, you still know where most of the planets are located in terms of the signs. And therefore, there's still a lot that you can actually know for sure about that chart, even if you don't know what the rising sign is. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think we have time for one more question. This one's from Ray, who says, thank you for your wonderful wisdom, Debbie. The nodes are direct in my chart, North Node in Taurus. I haven't found much information about what this means. Do you have any insight about this? Thank you.
Oh, I do. Do you know what? The insight I have is that the nodes are going to come back into Taurus very soon. And this is a 19-year cycle. So you're going to have what's called a nodal return, which is a time of great meaning in terms of your destiny. So you need to be looking in 2022 at where you feel you are in your destiny, and have a look back 19 years to see if that ticks any of your boxes in terms of a cycle. The north node in Taurus means that you have the south node in Scorpio. So you have got a tremendous amount of soul wisdom that you've built up from the south node in Scorpio, and you're trying to find stability in this lifetime, the stability of Taurus, but you are coming into this super important time. I know we've got to wrap up, haven't we? We're so on the clock, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah. Debbie, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
It's been so lovely to connect with you and all the people on the call, and it's absolutely my pleasure. And you can follow me on Instagram as well. It's Debbie Frank Astrologer. And please visit my website. Have fun with my book. I've had such fun writing it, and I really hope that it speaks to you and you kind of connect with the passion for astrology.
Yes. For everybody's reminder, the book is called What's Your Soul Sign? Astrology for Waking Up, Transforming, and Living a High Vibe Life. We've been speaking with Debbie Frank. Thank you to everybody for joining us live, everyone in the Banyen Books community, and to our producer, Jacob, who does so much in the background. Debbie, thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. And I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.